My daughter Jessica told me I was just the babysitter, while I stood in her pristine kitchen, flour still on my hands from making Emma and Tyler's favorite chocolate chip cookies. She said it casually, like mentioning the weather while scrolling through her phone and planning her weekend spa retreat with Mark. But I wasn't just watching her children. I was raising them while she lived her life. So I picked up my purse, called the most expensive babysitting service in Henderson, and walked out the front door. She wanted a real babysitter? She got one, at $68 an hour. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Kristina Walsh, and I'm 64 years old. I've lived in Henderson, Nevada for the past 37 years, ever since Robert got transferred here for his job at the power company. We bought a small ranch house with desert landscaping and a view of the mountains that still takes my breath away every morning when I open my bedroom curtains. Robert passed 3 years ago, leaving me with a house that feels too quiet and a daughter who seems to think I exist solely to make her life easier. I spent most of my working years as a medical receptionist at a busy family practice in Las Vegas. 42 years of scheduling appointments, filing insurance claims, and comforting worried parents in the waiting room. I knew every patient by name, remembered their birthdays, asked about their children's soccer games and piano recitals. When I retired 2 years ago, I thought I'd finally have time for myself. Time to read the books stacked on my nightstand, tend to my garden, maybe take that pottery class at the community center I'd been talking about for years. Instead, I became Jessica's unofficial, unpaid childcare service. It started innocently enough. She was overwhelmed with her new promotion at the marketing firm, and Mark was traveling more for work. Could I watch Emma and Tyler just for a few hours while she caught up on some projects? Of course I could. I'm their grandmother. I love spending time with them. What I didn't expect was for those few hours to turn into entire days, then weekends, then school breaks where I essentially moved into their house in Summerlin to keep their lives running smoothly. Jessica and Mark live in one of those planned communities where every house looks like it belongs in a magazine. White stucco walls, red tile roofs, and landscaping so perfect it looks artificial. Their house has 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and a kitchen island bigger than my entire living room. Everything is beige and cream and carefully coordinated. There are no scuff marks on the walls, no fingerprints on the refrigerator, no evidence that 2 young children actually live there. That's because I'm the one who cleans up after them, who wipes down surfaces and organizes toys before Jessica comes home from work. Emma is 8 and has Robert's curious eyes and my stubborn streak. She asks endless questions about everything, from why the sky is blue to whether dogs dream, and she remembers every answer I give her. Tyler is 5 and still believes in magic. He's convinced that I can fix anything with Band-Aids and kisses, and honestly, most of the time he's right. These children are the light of my life. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being their grandmother and became their caretaker. The shift happened so gradually, I almost didn't notice it. First, Jessica stopped asking if I could watch them, and started telling me when I was needed. Then she stopped saying thank you. The requests became assumptions, the favors became expectations, and my voluntary help became her entitlement. I found myself packing lunches, signing permission slips, attending parent-teacher conferences, and driving to soccer practice and dance class. Meanwhile, Jessica posted photos on social media of her girls' nights out, her weekend trips to Scottsdale, her romantic dinners with Mark. Don't get me wrong, I wanted to help. I wanted to be involved in my grandchildren's lives, but I also wanted to be seen as their grandmother, not their employee. I wanted Jessica to value my time, to appreciate my efforts, to remember that I had my own life too. Instead, she treated me like hired help who happened to work for free. The house in Summerlin became my second home, but I was never truly comfortable there. Jessica had very specific rules about how things should be done. The children's schedules were color-coded and laminated. Their meals had to follow a particular rotation she'd printed out and posted on the refrigerator. Even their playtime was structured and educational. I couldn't just let them be kids and eat ice cream for breakfast or build blanket forts in the living room. Everything had to be documented, photographed, and approved. I started keeping a mental tally of all the ways Jessica took me for granted. The time she canceled her date night plans but forgot to tell me until I was already at her house, dressed up and ready to watch the kids. The afternoon she extended her shopping trip by 4 hours without calling to let me know. The week she went to a conference in San Francisco and left me with a 15-page instruction manual for taking care of her own children. The morning she criticized the way I braided Emma's hair because it wasn't Instagram-worthy for school picture day. Each incident was small enough to overlook, but together they formed a pattern that left me feeling invisible and unappreciated. I was giving Jessica the gift of freedom, the luxury of spontaneity, the peace of mind that comes from knowing your children are safe and loved. In return, she gave me criticism, demands, and the assumption that my time was limitless and worthless. Robert used to say that respect is like a bank account. You have to make deposits before you can make withdrawals. Jessica had been making withdrawals for months without putting anything back in. My account was overdrawn, and I was tired of covering the deficit with my own self-worth. The worst part wasn't the lack of appreciation. It was the way she talked about me to other people. I overheard her on the phone with her friend Melissa, complaining about how hard it was to find good childcare in Las Vegas. She mentioned that she was lucky to have me as a backup option, but that she really needed someone more reliable, someone who could commit to a real schedule, someone professional. She talked about me like I was a teenager from down the street who occasionally helped out, not her mother who had rearranged her entire retirement to support Jessica's career. I started to feel like a ghost in my own family. Present but unseen. Helpful but unacknowledged. Necessary but not valued. I was there for every scraped knee and bedtime story, every homework assignment and doctor's appointment, but I wasn't there for the credit or recognition. Jessica got all the praise for being such a dedicated mother, while I got the exhaustion and responsibility of actually raising her children. My friends at the community center started asking why I never joined them for their weekly coffee dates anymore. Why I'd stopped coming to book club. Why I missed so many of the activities I used to love. I made excuses about being busy with family, but the truth was that I had let my own life shrink to accommodate Jessica's needs. I had become so focused on being the perfect grandmother and helper that I forgot to be Kristina. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October. Jessica had asked me to watch Emma and Tyler while she attended a mandatory training seminar at work. I arrived at 7 in the morning, as requested, with homemade muffins and a craft project I'd planned for the afternoon. Jessica was rushing around, getting ready to leave, when her phone rang. It was her friend Sarah, calling to invite her to a last-minute spa day in Boulder City. Some kind of special promotion at a resort that had just opened. I watched Jessica's face light up as she listened to the details. A full day of massages, facials, and relaxation by the pool. She hadn't had a spa day in months, she told Sarah. She definitely needed some time to unwind. Yes, she could absolutely make it work. She'd just need to arrange childcare. Jessica hung up the phone and turned to me with that expectant smile I'd seen so many times before. The smile that meant she was about to ask me for another favor, another sacrifice, another rearrangement of my plans to accommodate hers. "Mom," she said, her voice already taking on that wheedling tone she used when she wanted something. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I know this is last minute, but Sarah just called about this amazing spa package in Boulder City. It's only available today, and it's such a good deal. Would you be able to stay with the kids? I know you were planning to go home this afternoon, but this is really important for my mental health. She paused, waiting for my automatic yes, the response I always gave. but something inside me had shifted. Maybe it was the way she called it, arranging childcare, when talking to Sarah, as if I was just another service provider. Maybe it was the casual assumption that my plans were less important than hers. Maybe it was the realization that she'd rather spend money on a spa day than pay for actual childcare so I could have a day to myself. "I'm sorry, Jessica," I said quietly. "But I can't today. I have plans." Her face changed immediately. The expectant smile faded, replaced by confusion and then irritation. "Plans? What plans? You didn't mention any plans when we talked yesterday." "I have a pottery class at the community center," I said. It wasn't entirely true. The class was next week, but I could have signed up for today's session. The point was that I wanted to have plans, wanted to do something for myself instead of always being available for everyone else's needs. Jessica's confusion deepened. "Can't you reschedule? It's just a pottery class. This spa thing is time-sensitive. Sarah said they only have a few spots left." Just a pottery class. As if my interests and hobbies were trivial, easily discarded, whenever something more important came up. As if my time was an endless resource she could dip into whenever she pleased. "I don't want to reschedule," I said, and my voice was steadier than I felt. "I've been looking forward to this class. Maybe you could find another babysitter." "Another babysitter?" Jessica's voice pitched higher. "Mom, you know how hard it is to find someone good on short notice. And it's expensive. We're trying to save money right now." Save money. She wanted to save money by using free labor from her mother while spending a small fortune on a spa day. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Well," I said, "you'll figure something out. You're very resourceful." I could see the wheels turning in Jessica's head. She was calculating how much a professional babysitter would cost, weighing it against the price of the spa package. She was also probably wondering why I was being so difficult, so unreasonable, so unlike my usual accommodating self. "Fine," she said finally, and there was an edge to her voice I'd never heard before. "I'll call around, but I don't understand why you're being like this. It's not like you have a real job or anything urgent going on. You're you're basically just babysitting anyway. Why can't you just babysit today?" Just babysitting. There it was. The phrase that crystallized everything I'd been feeling for months. In Jessica's mind, I wasn't their grandmother sharing love and wisdom and creating memories. I wasn't a retired professional with my own interests and schedule. I was just a babysitter, a free one, but still just hired help. "Just babysitting," I repeated, and the words tasted bitter in my mouth. "You know what I mean?" Jessica said, but her cheeks were flushed now. She knew exactly how it sounded. "I didn't mean it like that. I just meant that you're already here, and it's not like watching the kids is difficult for you. You enjoy it." I did enjoy it. I loved Emma and Tyler more than anything in the world. But I also loved myself enough to know that I deserved better than to be taken for granted, dismissed, and treated like a convenience instead of a person. "I do enjoy spending time with my grandchildren," I said carefully. "But I'm not just a babysitter, Jessica. I'm their grandmother, and I'm also a person with my own life, my own interests, and my own plans. Plans that matter too." Jessica stared at me for a long moment. I could see her processing this unfamiliar version of her. Mother, the one who said no, who pushed back, who refused to be taken for granted. She wasn't sure how to handle it. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, fine. I'll find someone else. But I hope you know that this puts me in a really difficult position." She grabbed her phone and started scrolling through contacts, muttering under her breath about last-minute changes and unreliable family members. As if I was the unreliable one, despite months of dropping everything whenever she needed me. I kissed Emma and Tyler goodbye, promising to see them soon, and walked out to my car. My hands were shaking slightly as I started the engine, but it wasn't from fear or anxiety. It was from the adrenaline rush of finally standing up for myself, of finally saying what I'd been thinking for so long. As I drove home to Henderson, I thought about all the things I could do with my afternoon. I could actually sign up for that pottery class. I could read a book in my garden without interruption. I could call my sister in Phoenix and have a real conversation that didn't get cut short by children needing snacks or homework help. For the first time in months, my day belonged to me, and it felt wonderful. That afternoon marked the beginning of what I now recognize as a slow erosion of my boundaries. Jessica did find a babysitter for her spa day, a college student named Miranda, who charged $40 for 6 hours. Jessica complained about the cost for weeks afterward, making pointed comments about how expensive childcare had become and how lucky other mothers were to have family members who were more flexible with their schedules. The guilt worked, of course. It always did. By the following week, I was back to my regular routine of picking up Emma from school and staying with Tyler until Jessica got home from work. But something had changed in the dynamic between us. There was a tension now, an unspoken resentment that colored our interactions. Jessica seemed to view my one afternoon of unavailability as a betrayal, while I felt like I was being punished for having the audacity to prioritize my own needs for a single day. The demands on my time intensified rather than decreased. It was as if Jessica was testing me, seeing how far she could push before I pushed back again. She started calling me at the last minute with urgent requests. Could I pick up Emma from school because she had an unexpected client meeting? Could I stay late because Mark's flight was delayed? Could I come over early because Tyler was sick and couldn't go to daycare? Each request came with elaborate explanations about why it was so important, why she couldn't handle it herself, why I was the only one who could help. She painted herself as overwhelmed and desperate, making me feel selfish for even considering saying no. And most of the time, I didn't say no. Because these were my grandchildren, and they needed care, and I loved them too much to let them suffer because of the tension between their mother and me. But the resentment was building on both sides. I could see it in the way Jessica's jaw tightened when she had to ask me for help, as if the very act of needing me was an inconvenience. I could hear it in her voice when she gave me instructions, speaking to me like I was an employee who couldn't be trusted to use common sense. She started leaving more detailed notes, more specific guidelines, more rules about how things should be done. The notes multiplied and grew longer. Instructions about Emma's after-school snack, which had to be organic and nut-free and served on the blue plates, not the white ones. Reminders about Tyler's nap schedule, which couldn't vary by more than 15 minutes or he'd be cranky for the rest of the day. Detailed explanations about homework routines, bath time procedures, and bedtime stories that had to be read in a specific order. I found myself walking on eggshells in Jessica's house, afraid to deviate from her carefully. Planned systems. When I brought Emma different colored hair ties than the ones Jessica had laid out, I got a text message about how important it was to follow the schedule exactly as written. When I let Tyler have an extra cookie after dinner, Jessica reminded me that she was trying to teach him about portion control and healthy eating habits. The children began to sense the tension too. Emma started asking me why Mommy seemed upset when she came home from work. Tyler clung to me more when it was time for me to leave, as if he could feel the uncertainty in the air. They were caught in the middle of something they didn't understand, and I hated that my relationship with their mother was affecting their sense of security. Jessica's friends started making comments too. I overheard conversations at Emma's soccer games where other mothers talked about how hard it was to find reliable childcare, how expensive nannies had become, how lucky Jessica was to have family help. But there was an undercurrent to these conversations, a subtle implication that I was somehow not quite professional enough, not quite qualified enough, not quite the same as real childcare. I remember one particularly painful conversation I accidentally overheard when I was picking Emma up from a playdate. Jessica was talking to another mother, Lisa, whose nanny had just quit without notice. Lisa was stressed about finding replacement care, and Jessica was offering sympathy and advice. "At least you know your nanny was actually trained in child development," Jessica said. "I mean, my mom is great with the kids, but sometimes I worry that she's too relaxed about things. She doesn't follow routines the way a professional would. She lets them get away with things I wouldn't allow." "But it's free, right?" Lisa asked. "That has to be worth something." "Oh, absolutely," Jessica replied quickly. "I'm grateful for the help. I just sometimes think it would be easier to have someone who really understood proper childcare protocols. Someone who wouldn't take it personally if I gave feedback or asked them to do things differently." I stood frozen in the hallway, holding Emma's backpack and listening to my daughter discuss my inadequacies as if I was a problematic employee rather than her mother. The worst part wasn't the criticism itself, but the casual way she dismissed my decades of experience, my intuitive understanding of children, my deep love for Emma and Tyler. In her mind, professional training trumped grandmotherly wisdom, structured routines mattered more than emotional connection, and following protocols was more important than nurturing relationships. That evening, I went home to my quiet house in Henderson and sat in my kitchen, staring at the desert sunset through my window. I thought about the woman I used to be before I became Jessica's unofficial childcare provider. I remembered having conversations with friends that didn't revolve around children's schedules. I remembered making spontaneous plans, staying up, late reading, sleeping in on weekends. I remembered feeling like my time belonged to me. I pulled out a notebook and started writing down all the hours I'd spent caring for Emma and Tyler over the past 6 months. School pickups, evening babysitting, weekend sleepovers, sick days, vacation care. The list went on for pages. When I calculated the hours and multiplied them by what a professional babysitter would charge, the number was staggering. I had provided thousands of dollars worth of free childcare, and instead of gratitude, I was getting criticism about my methods and complaints about my lack of flexibility. The breaking point came the following month, during Emma's fall break from school. Jessica had planned a romantic getaway to Sedona with Mark, their first vacation alone in over a year. She asked if I could stay at their house for the 4 days. They'd be gone, essentially becoming a live-in nanny for the duration of their trip. I agreed, of course. Emma and Tyler were excited about having me stay over, and I was looking forward to uninterrupted time with them. Jessica spent the week before the trip creating detailed schedules, meal plans, and instruction sheets. She color-coded everything and laminated the most important documents. She showed me how to use her phone app to track the children's activities, moods, and eating habits. She made me practice using the security system and gave me phone numbers for everyone from the pediatrician to the pizza delivery place. The day before they left, Jessica called me with one final request. Her cleaning service had canceled at the last minute, and she wondered if I could do some light housekeeping while I was there. Nothing major, just keeping things tidy, maybe running the vacuum and wiping down the bathrooms. She'd really appreciate it, and it would make coming home so much more relaxing. I should have said no. I should have pointed out that I was already providing 4 days of free childcare, and that adding housekeeping to my responsibilities was crossing another line. But I was tired of fighting, tired of being seen as difficult and uncooperative. So I said yes. I could handle some light cleaning. Jessica and Mark left on Thursday morning, and for the first day, everything went smoothly. Emma and I made pancakes for breakfast, and Tyler helped me sort through his toy box. We played board games, read stories, and took a walk around their neighborhood. It felt like the old days, when spending time with my grandchildren was pure joy rather than a complicated negotiation. But by Friday, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I wasn't just babysitting. I was running a household. I was doing laundry, preparing meals, cleaning up messes, and managing 2 active children with very different needs and schedules. Emma had homework that required my help, and Tyler had a meltdown when he couldn't find his favorite stuffed animal. The dishwasher broke, flooding the kitchen floor, and I spent an hour on the phone with a repair service while trying to keep Tyler from walking through the puddles. Saturday brought new challenges. Emma woke up with a sore throat, and I had to decide whether it was serious enough to warrant a doctor's visit. Tyler spilled grape juice on the white living room carpet, and despite my best efforts with club soda and carpet cleaner, the stain was still visible. I knew Jessica would notice it immediately when she returned, and I dreaded the conversation that would follow. By Sunday evening, I was exhausted. The house was clean, the children were fed and bathed and tucked into their beds, but I felt like I'd aged a year in 4 days. I sat in Jessica's pristine living room, looking at the faint purple stain on the carpet, and wondering how I'd allowed my life to become so completely consumed by someone else's needs. When Jessica and Mark returned on Monday morning, they were tanned and relaxed and full of stories about their wonderful vacation. Jessica walked through the house with a critical eye, checking to see how well I'd maintained her standards. She noticed the carpet stain immediately, of course, and I saw her jaw tighten as she examined it. "What happened here?" she asked, and her tone was the same one she might use with a careless housekeeper. I explained about Tyler's accident and my efforts to clean it up. Jessica nodded, but I could see the disappointment in her face. She didn't say anything about the 4 days of care I'd provided, the meals I'd cooked, the homework I'd supervised, or the midnight comfort I'd given when Tyler had a bad dream. All she could focus on was the one thing that hadn't gone perfectly. "I'll call the carpet cleaning service," she said with a sigh. "They might be able to get it out completely." That was my thank you, a resigned acceptance that she'd have to spend money to fix my mistake. No acknowledgement of the sacrifice I'd made, the exhaustion I felt, or the fact that I'd given up 4 days of my own life to make their vacation possible. As I drove home to Henderson that afternoon, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in my relationship with Jessica. I was no longer her mother helping out with occasional babysitting. I had become her employee, subject to performance, reviews and criticism, expected to maintain professional standards without receiving professional compensation or respect. The thought that kept circling through my mind was simple, but profound. I deserved better than this. I deserved gratitude instead of criticism, appreciation instead of demands, respect instead of dismissal. I had raised Jessica to be independent and successful, and somehow along the way, she had forgotten that I was a person with my own needs and dignity. That night, I called my sister Linda in Phoenix and told her everything. Linda listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Kristina," she said finally, "you know this isn't normal, right? You know that most grandmothers don't provide 40 hours a week of free childcare and then get criticized for not being professional enough?" I did know that, somewhere deep down. But it had happened so gradually that I'd lost perspective. I'd been so focused on being helpful, on being available, on being the perfect grandmother, that I'd forgotten to protect my own boundaries and self-worth. "What should I do?" I asked Linda. "You should start saying no," she said. "You should remember that your time has value, whether Jessica recognizes it or not. And you should stop feeling guilty for having your own life." It sounded so simple when Linda said it, but I knew it would be the hardest thing I'd ever done, because saying no to Jessica meant risking my relationship with Emma and Tyler. It meant potentially being cut off from the grandchildren I loved more than anything in the world. But as I hung up the phone and prepared for bed, I realized that the current situation wasn't sustainable anyway. I was burning out, growing resentful, and beginning to dread the very thing that used to bring me the most joy: spending time with my grandchildren. If I didn't make changes soon, I might end up losing them anyway, not through conflict but through my own exhaustion and bitterness. Something had to change. The question was whether I had the courage to change it. The final straw came on a Wednesday morning in November, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. I was at Jessica's house as usual, getting Emma ready for school while Tyler played with his blocks in the living room. Jessica was rushing around, getting dressed for work, when her phone rang. It was her supervisor, calling about an unexpected client presentation that had been moved up to that afternoon. "I need you to come in early today," Jessica said into the phone, pulling on her blazer with one hand. "Can you be here by 9? Great, I'll see you then." She hung up and turned to me with that familiar expectant look. "Mom, I know this is short notice, but I need to leave for work right now. There's a big presentation this afternoon and I need to prepare. Can you handle everything here until Mark gets home tonight?" I glanced at the clock. It was 7:30 in the morning. Mark wouldn't be home until after 6. That meant nearly 11 hours of childcare, on top of the 6 hours I'd already committed to. But it wasn't really a question, was it? Jessica was already grabbing her purse and car keys, assuming I'd say yes. "Of course," I heard myself saying, because that's what I always said. "I'll take care of everything." "You're a lifesaver," Jessica called over her shoulder as she headed for the garage. "Emma's pickup is at 3:15, and Tyler has that doctor's appointment at 2. The information is on the fridge. Oh, and can you start dinner? There's chicken in the freezer that needs to thaw." The garage door rumbled shut, and I was alone with the children and another day that belonged entirely to someone else's schedule. Emma finished her cereal and went to brush her teeth. Tyler needed help finding his favorite shirt. I packed Emma's lunch, signed a permission slip for a field trip, and found Tyler's missing shoe under the couch. The morning passed in its usual blur of small tasks and constant vigilance. I drove Emma to school, took Tyler to the park to burn off some energy, then brought him home for lunch and his nap. While he slept, I folded the laundry Jessica had, left in the dryer, wiped down the kitchen counters, and started the chicken defrosting in the sink. At 2 o'clock, I woke Tyler from his nap and drove him to his pediatric appointment. It was supposed to be a routine checkup, but Dr. Martinez was running behind schedule, and we didn't get out of there until almost 3. I had to call the school office and ask them to keep Emma in aftercare because I wouldn't make it in time for regular pickup. "No problem, Mrs. Walsh," the secretary said. "We'll note that Emma's grandmother will be picking her up from extended care." Emma's grandmother. Not her mother, not her primary caregiver, but her grandmother who happened to be available because her mother was too busy with work. The distinction felt important somehow, a reminder that this wasn't supposed to be my full-time job. I picked up Emma at 4, drove both children home, and started dinner preparations. Tyler was cranky from his abbreviated nap and wanted constant attention. Emma had homework that required help with math problems I barely remembered how to solve. By the time Mark walked through the door at 6:30, I felt like I'd been running a daycare center for 12 hours straight. "Hey, Kristina," Mark said, loosening his tie and glancing around the kitchen. "Thanks for covering today. How did everything go?" "Fine," I said, because what else was I supposed to say? That I was exhausted? That I'd given up my entire day without any advance notice? That I was starting to feel like hired help rather than family? Great. Jessica texted that her presentation went really well. She should be home in an hour or so. Mark grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and headed upstairs to change clothes, leaving me to finish dinner and supervise the children. When Jessica finally arrived home at 8 o'clock, she was in a fantastic mood. The presentation had been a huge success, and her boss had hinted at a possible promotion. She hugged Emma and Tyler, who had already eaten dinner and were in their pajamas, then turned to me with a bright smile. "Mom, you're amazing. I don't know what I would have done without you today. This presentation could really change things for me at work." She was genuinely grateful, I could see that, but her gratitude felt hollow somehow, like someone thanking a restaurant server for good service. Appreciative but impersonal, focused on the convenience I provided rather than the sacrifice I'd made. "I'm glad it went well," I said, gathering my purse and car keys. "I should head home now. It's been a long day." "Of course," Jessica said, already distracted by her phone. Drive safely. I'll talk to you tomorrow. I kissed Emma and Tyler. Good night, and drove home through the dark Henderson streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. 12 hours. I'd given Jessica 12 hours of my life so she could advance her career, and she'd thanked me like I was a helpful neighbor who'd collected her mail while she was out of town. When I got home, I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time before going inside. My house felt strange after spending so much time in Jessica's perfectly organized space. Everything was where I'd left it that morning, untouched and waiting for my return. My coffee cup still sat in the sink from breakfast. The book I'd been reading lay open on the kitchen table, a bookmark holding my place in a story I'd barely had time to think about. I looked around my own kitchen, my own living room, my own space that I'd barely inhabited in months. When had I stopped living my own life? When had my house become just a place to sleep between shifts at Jessica's? The next morning, Jessica called while I was having my coffee and reading the newspaper. "Mom, I have a huge favor to ask. Remember how I mentioned that promotion? Well, my boss wants me to attend a 3-day conference in Denver next week. It's a really important opportunity, but it means I'll need childcare help. Mark has that trade show in Phoenix the same week, so we're both going to be traveling." I set down my coffee cup and stared out the window at my garden, where the desert landscaping looked brown and neglected. When was the last time I'd spent an afternoon tending to my plants, pulling weeds, enjoying the simple pleasure of working with my hands in the dirt? "I know it's a lot to ask," Jessica continued, "but would you be able to stay at the house with Emma and Tyler? I'd really appreciate it, and the kids love having sleepovers with Grandma." 3 days, 72 hours of full-time childcare and household management. 3 days of living by someone else's schedule, following someone else's rules, being responsible for someone else's life while my own gathered dust. "When is the conference?" I asked, though I was already mentally rearranging my non-existent plans. "Next Wednesday through Friday. I know it's short notice, but this opportunity just came up. Please say you can do it. I don't know who else to ask." Of course she didn't know who else to ask, because I'd made myself so available, so reliable, so willing to drop everything at a moment's notice that she hadn't bothered to develop any backup plans. I was her childcare safety net, always there to catch whatever she couldn't handle herself. "Let me think about it," I said, and Jessica's surprised silence told me how unusual that response was. "Think about it? Mom, what's to think about? The kids love spending time with you, and I really need your help. This conference could make a huge difference in my career." "I understand that it's important to you," I said carefully, "but I need to check my schedule." "Your schedule?" Jessica's voice carried a note of incredulity. "What schedule? You're retired." There it was, the assumption that retirement meant I had no life, no commitments, no plans worth considering. In Jessica's mind, being retired meant being available, being flexible, being ready to drop everything whenever she needed me. "I'll call you back later today," I said, and hung up before she could argue. I spent the morning walking through my house, really looking at it for the first time in months. The guest room where I kept my craft supplies was covered in dust. The reading chair by the window looked lonely and unused. The pottery wheel I'd bought 2 years ago still sat in its box in the garage, waiting for me to find time to learn how to use it. I called Linda in Phoenix, and she listened while I explained Jessica's latest request. 3 days? Linda said. "Kristina, that's not babysitting anymore. That's being a live-in nanny, and you're not getting paid for it." "It's family," I said, but the words sounded weak even to me. "Family should respect each other," Linda replied. "Family should appreciate each other. Family shouldn't take advantage of each other." After I hung up with Linda, I did something I hadn't done in months. I looked up the pottery class schedule at the community center. There was an 8-week beginner's course starting the following Monday, meeting every Wednesday and Friday afternoon. The same days Jessica would be at her conference. I thought about the conference, about 3 days of someone else's routine, someone else's rules, someone else's life. Then I thought about the pottery class, about learning something new, about creating something beautiful with my own hands, about spending time doing something I wanted to do, something that was just for me. I called the community center and enrolled in the pottery class. Then I called Jessica back. I checked my schedule, I said. I can't help with the conference. I have a commitment those days. A commitment? Jessica's voice was sharp with surprise. What kind of commitment? I enrolled in a pottery class. It meets on Wednesday and Friday afternoons. A pottery class? Jessica repeated, as if I'd said I was planning to join the circus. Mom, this is important. Can't you skip the class? Or find a different session? No, I said, and the word felt foreign in my mouth. I don't want to skip it. I've been looking forward to this class. But Mom, I really need your help. This conference could change everything for my career. Surely a hobby class isn't as important as that. A hobby class. As if my interests and desires were trivial, easily sacrificed for her convenience. As if my time was worthless unless I was using it to serve her needs. My pottery class is important to me, I said firmly. You'll need to find another solution. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear Jessica's shock through the phone. This wasn't the accommodating mother she was used to, the one who always said yes, who always made her problems disappear. I can't believe you're doing this to me, Jessica said finally. Do you have any idea how hard it is to find good childcare? On short notice? How expensive it is? Yes, I said quietly. I imagine it's very expensive. Professional childcare usually is. Another silence. Then Jessica's voice, colder now. Fine, I'll figure something out. But I want you to know that this puts me in a really difficult position. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said. But I'm not available. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, my hands shaking slightly. I'd done it. I'd said, no. I'd chosen my own needs over Jessica's demands and the world hadn't ended. But I also knew that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. Jessica wasn't going to forgive this easily. She wasn't going to understand why I'd chosen a pottery class over helping her family. In her mind, I'd betrayed her, let her down when she needed me most. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. What if she couldn't find good childcare? What if something happened to Emma or Tyler while they were with a stranger? What if Jessica's career suffered because I wasn't available to help? But underneath the guilt was something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. For 3 days next week, I wouldn't have to follow anyone else's schedule. I wouldn't have to worry about someone else's children, someone else's house, someone else's expectations. I would sit at a pottery wheel and learn to shape clay with my own hands, creating something that belonged entirely to me. The phone rang again an hour later. It was Jessica, and her voice was different now, not angry, but calculating. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said. I understand that your pottery class is important to you. But I was wondering if maybe we could work something out. What if I paid you for watching the kids during the conference? Would that make a difference? The offer hung in the air between us. Payment for my time, acknowledgement that my childcare had value. It should have felt like a victory, but instead it felt like the final confirmation of what I'd suspected all along. In Jessica's mind, I wasn't family helping family. I was a service provider, and like any service provider, I could be bought if the price was right. How much were you thinking? I asked, curious to see how she valued my time. Well, professional. Babysitters charge about $15 an hour, Jessica said. So for 3 days, maybe. $300? $300 for 72 hours of work. Less than $5 an hour. If Jessica hired a live-in nanny for 3 days, it would cost her at least $1,000, probably more. But because I was family, because I was retired, because I was just grandma, she thought she could lowball me and I'd be grateful for the acknowledgement. "No, thank you," I said. "I'm not available." "Not available?" Jessica's voice cracked with disbelief. "Mom, I'm offering to pay you. I thought that's what you wanted." "What I want," I said slowly, "is to be respected. What I want is to be appreciated. What I want is for my time to be valued. And what I want right now is to take a pottery class and remember what it feels like to do something just for myself." I hung up before she could respond, and this time I turned off my phone. I sat in my quiet house, surrounded by the dust and neglect that had accumulated while I lived someone else's life, and I made a decision. I was done being Jessica's unpaid, underappreciated childcare solution. I was done sacrificing my own needs for her convenience. I was done feeling guilty for having a life outside of her family. It was time to remember who I was before I became just the babysitter. And it was time to show Jessica that if she wanted professional childcare, she was going to have to pay professional prices. The pottery class was just the beginning. Jessica didn't call me for 3 days after our conversation about the pottery class. The silence felt strange at first, like a missing sound that takes time to identify. No morning phone calls asking if I could pick up Emma from school. No afternoon texts about whether I was available for last-minute babysitting. No evening requests to help with bedtime routines. For the first time in months, my phone stayed quiet, and my schedule belonged entirely to me. I used those 3 days to remember what my own life looked like. I slept until 8 in the morning instead of getting up at 6 to be at Jessica's house by 7. I made myself a proper breakfast and ate it slowly while reading the newspaper from front to back. I called my friend Margaret, whom I hadn't spoken to in weeks, and we talked for over an hour about books and gardening and the new restaurant that had opened near the community center. On Friday afternoon, I attended my first pottery class. The instructor was a patient woman named Carol, who showed us how to center clay on the wheel, how to feel for the right pressure, how to coax the spinning earth into whatever shape we imagined. My first attempt collapsed immediately, a lopsided mess that made me laugh out loud. But my second try held its form, and by the end of the class, I had created a small, imperfect bowl that was entirely mine. Walking to my car after class, my hands still slightly damp from washing clay from my fingers, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Satisfaction that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or approval. The bowl sitting in the kiln wasn't for Emma's cereal or Tyler's snacks. It wasn't going to make anyone else's life easier or more convenient. It existed because I had wanted to create it, because I had taken the time to learn something new, because I had chosen to invest in my own growth rather than someone else's schedule. That evening, as I prepared a simple dinner for one and settled into my reading chair with a book I'd been trying to finish for weeks, my phone finally rang. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and I considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity won out, and I answered on the 4th ring. "Mom," Jessica's voice was carefully controlled, the tone she used when she was trying very hard not to sound upset. "I wanted to let you know that I found childcare for the conference next week." "That's good," I said, turning down the corner of my book page. "I'm glad you were able to work something out." "It wasn't easy," Jessica continued, and I could hear the accusation lurking beneath her measured words. "Most professional services require at least 2 weeks' notice for overnight care. I had to call 8 different agencies before I found someone who had availability." I didn't respond to the implied criticism. Instead, I asked, "Did you find someone good?" "Her name is Sarah Martinez. She's a certified nanny with excellent references. She charges $68 an hour for overnight care, plus a flat fee for meal preparation and light housekeeping." Jessica's voice carried a note of shock, as if she couldn't quite believe what professional childcare actually cost. $68 an hour. I did quick math in my head. For 3 days and 2 nights, Jessica would be paying close to $5,000 for the same care I had been providing for free. The irony wasn't lost on me, though I kept my thoughts to myself. "That sounds expensive," I said neutrally. "It is expensive," Jessica said, and now the anger was beginning to seep through her careful composure. "It's incredibly expensive. Almost a quarter of what I'll make from this promotion, if I even get it. But I guess that's what happens when family isn't available to help." The guilt trip was expertly delivered, but it bounced off me like rain on a windshield. I had spent too many hours over the past few days thinking about value and respect and the cost of always saying yes. I wasn't going to be manipulated back into my old patterns. "I hope the conference goes well," I said, "and I hope Sarah works out for you." "Mom?" Jessica's voice softened slightly, taking on the wheedling tone she'd used since childhood when she wanted something. "Are you sure you can't reconsider? I mean, it's just one weekend, and I could pay you the same rate I'm paying Sarah." Now she was willing to pay me what the job was actually worth, but only after she'd discovered what professional care cost in the real world. Only after she'd realized that my time and effort had genuine monetary value that she'd been getting. For free. "I'm not available," I repeated. "I have my pottery class, and I've made other plans for the weekend." It wasn't entirely true. My weekend plans consisted of finishing my book, working in my garden, and maybe driving out to Lake Mead for a peaceful afternoon by the water. But they were my plans, chosen by me for my own enjoyment, and that made them important regardless of how mundane they might seem to Jessica. "Other plans," Jessica repeated, and I could hear the disbelief in her voice. "More important than helping your daughter with a career opportunity?" "Plans that are important to me," I said firmly. "Just like your conference is important to you." After we hung up, I sat in my living room and wondered if I was being unreasonable. Was I punishing Jessica for taking me for granted? Was I being selfish by choosing my own needs over my family's? The doubts circled through my mind like vultures, picking at my resolve. But then I thought about the pottery class, about the simple joy of learning something new. I thought about my neglected garden, my unread books, my unused craft supplies. I thought about all the afternoons I'd spent following someone else's schedule instead of my own. And I realized that what I was doing wasn't selfish at all. It was necessary. The weekend passed quietly. I worked in my garden, pulling weeds and planting new desert roses that would bloom in the spring. I finished my book and started another one. I called Linda and told her about the pottery class, about the way the clay felt cool and responsive under my hands. We talked about the trip we'd been planning to take together, visiting the Grand Canyon in December when the crowds would be smaller and the weather cooler. "Have you booked the hotel yet?" Linda asked. "Not yet," I admitted. "I wasn't sure if I'd be available. Because of Jessica." I hesitated. The truth was that I'd been avoiding making concrete plans because I never knew when Jessica might need me. I'd been living in a state of perpetual availability, always ready to drop my own plans if my daughter required my help. "I'll book it this week," I said, and as I spoke the words, I felt a small thrill of rebellion. I was making plans that belonged to me, plans that wouldn't be subject to Jessica's schedule or needs. Monday arrived with another pottery class, and this time I managed to create a small vase that actually looked intentional. Carol praised my improvement, and I felt a flush of pride that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. After class, I stopped at the community center's bulletin board and noticed an announcement for a book club that met twice a month. Without giving myself time to reconsider, I wrote down the contact information. Tuesday morning brought the first text message I'd received from Jessica since our phone conversation. It was a photo of Sarah, the professional nanny, helping Emma with her homework. The caption read, "Emma loves her new babysitter. Sarah is so patient and educational." The message stung, as I'm sure it was intended to. The implication was clear. A professional nanny was better at caring for my grandchildren than I was. Sarah was patient and educational in ways that I, apparently, was not. The subtext was that Jessica had upgraded from her inadequate mother to a superior alternative. I stared at the photo for a long time. Emma was seated at the kitchen table, her math homework spread out in front of her, while Sarah leaned over her shoulder pointing at something on the page. They both looked focused and content. Sarah was young, probably in her 20s, with the kind of professional demeanor that inspired confidence. She wore khaki pants and a neat polo shirt, the uniform of someone who took childcare seriously, as a career rather than treating it as a family obligation. Part of me wanted to respond to Jessica's text, to point out that I had helped Emma with countless homework assignments, that I had been patient through tantrums and gentle through tears, that I had loved her grandchildren long before Sarah appeared on the scene. But I didn't respond. Instead, I deleted the message and went about my day. The second photo arrived Wednesday evening during my pottery class. This one showed Tyler and Sarah baking cookies together, both of them wearing matching aprons and flour-dusted smiles. The caption read, "Tyler's new favorite activity. Sarah is teaching him to measure ingredients and follow recipes." Again, the implication was clear. Sarah was educational, structured, purposeful in her interactions with the children. She wasn't just watching them, she was enriching their lives with meaningful activities and learning opportunities. The message was designed to make me feel inadequate, to make me question whether my own approach to childcare had been good enough. By Thursday, I had received 4 more photos. Sarah helping Emma practice piano. Sarah teaching Tyler to tie his shoes. Sarah organizing their toy room with labeled bins and color-coded storage systems. Each image was accompanied by glowing captions about Sarah's professionalism, creativity, and educational approach. I understood what Jessica was doing. She was showing me what I was missing, what the children were gaining from having professional care instead of grandmotherly attention. She was trying to make me jealous, trying to prove that she didn't need me as much as I thought she did. The strategy might have worked a month ago. The old Kristina would have been hurt by the comparisons, would have questioned her own abilities, would have called Jessica to apologize and beg for another chance to prove her worth. But the woman sitting in the pottery studio, learning to shape clay into something beautiful and functional, wasn't the same person who had spent months being taken for granted. Instead of feeling inadequate, I felt relieved. If Sarah was truly as wonderful as Jessica claimed, then maybe Jessica wouldn't need my help anymore. Maybe I could continue focusing on my own life, my own interests, my own growth. Maybe the children would benefit from having professional care, and I could go back to being their grandmother instead of their unpaid babysitter. Friday brought the final photo in Jessica's series. It showed Sarah, Emma, and Tyler at Red Rock Canyon, hiking a easy trail and examining interesting rocks together. The caption read, "Educational field trip. Sarah knows so much about geology and local wildlife. The kids are learning so much." This photo bothered me more than the others, not because of the educational content, but because of the location. Red Rock Canyon was one of my favorite places in Nevada, a spot I had always planned to visit with Emma and Tyler when they were a little older. I had imagined taking them there myself, sharing my love of the desert landscape, creating memories that would last long after I was gone. Now Sarah had beaten me to it. She had given the children their first experience of one of Nevada's most beautiful natural areas. She had been the one to answer their questions about the red rock formations, to point out the desert wildlife, to help them collect interesting stones as souvenirs. For the first time since I'd started saying no to Jessica's requests, I felt a stab of genuine loss. Not because I envied Sarah's professional skills or educational approach, but because I realized that stepping back from constant childcare meant missing out on some experiences with my grandchildren. There would be firsts that I wouldn't witness, adventures that I wouldn't share, memories that would be created without me. The realization forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. part of my willingness to provide unlimited childcare hadn't been entirely selfless. Yes, I loved Emma and Tyler and wanted to help Jessica succeed in her career, but I had also been motivated by fear of being left out, of becoming irrelevant in my grandchildren's lives, of losing my connection to the family that had become the center of my world after Robert's death. By always saying yes, by always being available, I had been trying to make myself indispensable. I had been trading my time and energy for the security of knowing that I was needed, that my place in the family was secure. The constant demands on my availability had been exhausting, but they had also been proof of my importance. Now, watching Sarah take my grandchildren on adventures and teach them new skills, I had to face the possibility that maybe I wasn't as indispensable as I'd thought. Maybe Jessica and the children could thrive without my constant presence. Maybe my value as a grandmother wasn't dependent on my availability as a babysitter. That evening, I called Linda and told her about the photos, about my conflicted feelings, about the fear that I was losing my connection to Emma and Tyler. "Kristina," Linda said gently, "do you really think your grandchildren are going to forget how much you love them just because you're not watching them every day? Do you think they're going to replace you with a babysitter?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Sometimes it feels like if I'm not useful, I'm not wanted." "That's not love," Linda said firmly. "That's employment. Love doesn't depend on usefulness. Love doesn't require you to sacrifice your own life to prove your worth." Her words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. I had been confusing love with service, relationship with employment, family with obligation. I had been so afraid of being unnecessary that I had forgotten the difference between being needed and being loved. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was in my garden, transplanting some small cacti I'd bought at the nursery, when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. I looked up to see Emma running toward me, her face bright with excitement. "Grandma Kristina!" she called, launching herself into my arms with the abandon that only 8-year-olds possess. "I missed you so much." Behind her, Jessica approached more slowly, looking somewhat uncomfortable. She was carrying Tyler, who was still rubbing sleep from his eyes and clutching his favorite stuffed elephant. "Hi, Mom," Jessica said, setting Tyler down so he could toddle over to me for his own hug. "I hope you don't mind us stopping by. The kids have been asking about you all week." I hugged Tyler close, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair, feeling the solid weight of his small body against mine. Whatever complicated feelings existed between Jessica and me, my love for these children was pure and uncomplicated. "I don't mind at all," I said, meaning it completely. "I've missed you both too." "Grandma, can you show me your garden?" Emma asked, taking my dirt-stained hand in her clean one. "I want to see all the new plants." For the next hour, I gave Emma and Tyler a tour of my small desert garden, explaining how each plant was adapted to survive in the harsh Nevada climate, showing them the tiny buds that would become spring flowers, letting them help me water the newly transplanted cacti. Jessica sat on my patio, checking her phone occasionally, but mostly just watching us with an unreadable expression. When it was time for them to leave, Emma hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "I love you, Grandma. Sarah is nice, but she's not you." As I watched their car pull out of my driveway, I realized that Linda had been right. My relationship with Emma and Tyler wasn't dependent on my availability as a babysitter. They loved me because I was their grandmother, because I knew their favorite songs and remembered their fears and celebrated their small victories. That love wasn't going to disappear because I'd learned to say no to their mother's demands. But I also realized that Jessica's hiring of Sarah had created an opportunity I hadn't expected. For the first time in months, I could interact with my grandchildren without the weight of responsibility, without watching the clock or worrying about schedules or feeling like an employee rather than family. That evening, as I cleaned the dirt from under my fingernails and prepared a simple dinner, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Peace. Not the peace of exhaustion after a long day of caring for others, but the peace of knowing that my life belonged to me, that my choices were my own, that my worth wasn't measured by my usefulness to others. The pottery class had been just the beginning. I was ready to reclaim the rest of my life. 3 weeks later, Jessica called me on a Thursday evening. Her voice was different, smaller somehow, lacking the confident expectation that had characterized our conversations for months. "Mom," she said, "I need to talk to you about something. Are you free this weekend?" I was sitting in my reading chair, a cup of tea cooling on the side table next to a pottery magazine I'd picked up at the library. My second bowl from pottery class sat on the bookshelf nearby, slightly lopsided but proudly displayed. I had plans for Saturday morning at the farmer's market with Margaret, followed by lunch and maybe a drive out to Valley of Fire State Park. Sunday was book club, my first meeting with the group I'd finally worked up the courage to join. "I have some things planned," I said honestly. "What did you need to talk about?" "Could you come over Sunday evening, after the kids are in bed? It's important." The seriousness in her voice concerned me, but I didn't immediately rearrange my schedule the way I once would have. "I can stop by around 8 after book club." "Book club?" Jessica sounded surprised. "I didn't know you joined a book club." "There's a lot you don't know about my life lately," I said gently, and let the observation hang in the air between us. Sunday evening found me driving through the familiar streets of Summerlin, but this time I wasn't carrying a diaper bag or snacks for the children. I wasn't arriving to start a shift or take over someone else's responsibilities. I was simply visiting my daughter, something I realized we hadn't done in months without the pretext of childcare. Jessica answered the door looking tired. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore yoga pants and an oversized sweater that made her look younger and more vulnerable than the polished professional I was used to seeing. "Thanks for coming," she said, leading me into the living room. The house was quieter than I'd ever experienced it. Toys, neatly arranged in their designated bins, no evidence of the chaos that usually accompanied children's bedtime routines. We sat across from each other in the formal seating area that was normally reserved for guests, an arrangement that felt strange and distant. Jessica fidgeted with her wedding ring, spinning it around her finger in a nervous gesture I remembered from her childhood. "How was your book club?" she asked, clearly stalling. "It was wonderful," I said. "We discussed The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I'm excited about next month's selection. These women are all so well-read and interesting. I wish I'd joined sooner." Jessica nodded absently, then took a deep breath. "Mom, I owe you an apology. A big one." I waited, giving her space to continue. "The conference was successful. I got the promotion. But it cost me almost $5,000 for 3 days of childcare. And that's not even counting the meals Sarah prepared and the educational activities she organized." Jessica's voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "I kept thinking about how much money I was spending on something you'd been doing for free, and I started to understand." She trailed off, looking down at her hands. "Understand what?" I asked gently. "How much I'd been taking advantage of you. How much your time and effort were actually worth. How much I'd been expecting without ever really appreciating." Jessica looked up at me, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Sarah was professional and capable, but she wasn't you. She didn't know that Emma prefers her sandwiches cut diagonally, or that Tyler needs his stuffed elephant to nap, or that they both love hearing stories about their grandfather Robert." I felt a flutter of vindication, but it was tempered by sadness for the distance that had grown between us. "Sarah did a good job," Jessica continued. "But she was performing a service. You were providing love, and I treated your love like it was a service I was entitled to, instead of a gift I should have treasured." The tears spilled over now, and Jessica wiped them away impatiently. "I've been thinking about it for weeks. especially after Sarah handed me a detailed report about the children's activities and behavior, like they were clients instead of my kids. I realized that you never made me feel like my children were a burden or a job. You loved spending time with them, and I took that for granted. I reached across the space between us and took her hand. I did love spending time with them. I still do. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like love and started feeling like obligation. I know, Jessica whispered. And that's my fault. I turned you into an employee instead of appreciating you as their grandmother. I criticized your methods and questioned your judgment when I should have been grateful for your devotion. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the weight of what had been said. How are Emma and Tyler adjusting to the new arrangement? I asked. Jessica smiled through her tears. They miss you terribly. Emma asks every day when Grandma Kristina is coming over. Tyler keeps looking for you when he wakes up from his nap. They like Sarah fine, but they want their grandmother. I miss them too, I admitted. More than I expected, but I don't miss feeling unappreciated. You'll never feel that way again, Jessica said firmly. If you'll give me another chance, I want to do things differently. I want to value your time and respect your boundaries. I want Emma and Tyler to have their grandmother back, not another babysitter. What would that look like? I asked. Jessica had clearly thought about this. I'd like to ask for your help with specific things in advance, with real appreciation, for what you're giving up to help me. And I want to pay you for extended childcare, the way I would pay anyone else. I shook my head. I don't want payment from my family, Jessica, but I do want respect. I want my time to be valued, even if it's not compensated. I want to be asked, not told, and I want to be able to say no without guilt trips or manipulation. Deal, Jessica said immediately. And I want to know about your pottery class and your book club and whatever else is going on in your life. I want to be your daughter again, not just someone who uses your services. I'd like that too, I said and meant it. We talked for another hour, really talked, in a way we hadn't done since Jessica was a teenager confiding in me about boys and friendships and fears about the future. She told me about the pressures of her new position, about trying to balance career advancement with being a good mother. I told her about rediscovering interests I'd abandoned, about the satisfaction of learning new skills, about the friends I was making in my various classes and groups. As I prepared to leave, Jessica walked me to the door. Would you like to have Emma and Tyler for a sleepover next weekend? Not because I need childcare, but because I think you'd all enjoy it. They've been begging to spend the night at Grandma's house. I'd love that, I said, and realized I genuinely would. A sleepover motivated by love rather than convenience, planned in advance rather than sprung on me at the last minute, felt entirely different from the endless cycle of emergency childcare I'd been providing. And Mom? Jessica caught my arm as I stepped onto the porch. Thank you for setting boundaries, for making me realize what I was doing wrong, for not letting me take advantage of your love anymore. Driving home through the quiet Henderson streets, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. I had reclaimed my time, rediscovered my interests, and learned to value myself enough to demand respect from others. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned that love doesn't require martyrdom, that helping family doesn't mean sacrificing yourself, that being a good grandmother doesn't mean being an available grandmother 24 hours a day. My phone buzzed with a text as I pulled into my driveway. It was from Emma, sent from Jessica's phone. Grandma Kristina, I can't wait for our sleepover. Can we make pancakes and work in your garden? I love you. I smiled as I typed back. Yes to pancakes and gardening. I love you too, sweetheart. See you Friday evening. The next morning, I attended my pottery class and successfully created my first functional coffee mug. Carol praised my steady improvement and suggested I consider the intermediate class starting next month. I signed up immediately, no longer worried about conflicts with someone else's schedule. That afternoon, I called Linda to tell her about my conversation with Jessica and to confirm our Grand Canyon trip for December. We spent an hour planning our itinerary, and I felt the thrill of anticipation for an adventure that belonged entirely to me. Later, as I worked in my garden, I thought about the delicate balance between family obligation and personal fulfillment. I had learned that I could love my grandchildren deeply without sacrificing my own identity, that I could support my daughter's success without abandoning my own dreams, that I could be helpful without being taken for granted. The desert roses I'd planted were already showing new growth, small green shoots reaching toward the Nevada sun. Like those plants, I was learning to thrive in conditions that had once seemed harsh, to find my own way of flourishing despite the challenges of my environment. When Emma and Tyler arrived for their sleepover that Friday, they brought construction paper cards they'd made at school. Emma's showed a stick figure with gray hair standing next to a pottery wheel. Tyler's was covered in crayon hearts and the words, "I love Grandma," written in his careful 5-year-old script. As we made pancakes together Saturday morning, Emma chattering about her week at school, and Tyler proudly showing me how he could crack eggs without getting shell in the bowl, I realized that this was what I had been missing during all those months of structured childcare. Not the responsibility or the endless tasks, but the simple joy of being their grandmother. We spent the morning in the garden, Emma learning to identify different types of cacti while Tyler collected smooth pebbles for a craft project. After lunch, I taught them both to work with clay, their small hands eager to learn, their faces bright with concentration and delight. That evening, as I tucked them into the guest room beds I'd prepared with fresh sheets and extra pillows, Emma looked up at me with serious eyes. "Grandma, are you happy now?" she asked. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Mommy said you were sad before because you were working too hard. She said that's why you needed to take care of yourself more. Are you happy now that you're taking pottery class and reading books?" Out of the mouths of babes. Jessica had obviously tried to explain my absence in terms an 8-year-old could understand, and somehow Emma had grasped the essential truth that had taken me months to recognize. "Yes," I said, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "I'm much happier now. And you know what makes me happiest of all?" "What?" "Spending time with you and Tyler because I want to, not because I have to. That makes our time together even more special." Emma smiled and snuggled deeper into her pillow. "I'm glad you're happy, Grandma. I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart. More than all the stars in the Nevada sky." As I turned off the light and made my way to my own bedroom, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. It had taken courage to set boundaries, wisdom to recognize my own worth, and strength to risk losing something precious in order to save it. I had learned that being just the babysitter wasn't an insult to my worth, but a reminder of my value. Professional childcare was expensive because it was valuable work, and I had been providing that valuable work for free while accepting criticism and disrespect in return. More importantly, I had learned that my worth as a grandmother wasn't measured by my availability as a caregiver. My grandchildren loved me not because I was always there when their mother needed a babysitter, but because I was their grandmother who knew their favorite stories, remembered their fears, celebrated their victories, and loved them unconditionally. Now, as I looked ahead to my intermediate pottery class, my book club meetings, my Grand Canyon adventure with Linda, and my weekend sleepovers with Emma and Tyler, I felt a sense of balance I hadn't experienced in years. I had my own life again, rich with interests and friendships and personal growth. And I had my family too, loved and appreciated rather than taken for granted. The woman who had stood in Jessica's kitchen months ago, flour on her hands and hurt in her heart, had been transformed. Not by drama or confrontation, but by the simple act of remembering her own worth and insisting that others remember it too. I had stopped being just the babysitter by recognizing that I had never been just anything. I was a grandmother, a woman, a person deserving of respect and consideration. and that was worth more than any hourly wage Sarah could ever command. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.